All right, we are going to get started today. My name is Megan. I will be moderating, so I will be popping in and out. But our main presenters today will be Daryl Wisdall and Jasmine Hall, both Senior Regulatory Affairs Specialists at MedEnvoy Global. They will be presenting today on FDA compliance and defining your QMSR journey. So Daryl will be presenting the main presentation here. If any questions do come up throughout, you can put them in the question box up on top. That's a little question mark in the bubble. We did have some questions submitted in advance, so we will be starting with those ones, but we'll try to get to as many as we can. And then we'll also have Danielle on our team moderating the chat and getting back to as many questions as we can. So as things come up, please put them in there. We'll try to get to them. And then following the presentation, we'll be sending out a recording along with the transcript of the full presentation. So you can review those materials, and then we'll be offering one-on-one calls if you do have any further questions. So without further ado, Daryl, welcome.
Thank you very much. Whoops. Thank you very much. Brilliant. It's great to see everybody, or great to virtually see everybody today. We will get started here. I'm just going to switch to the next slide here. Just give me one moment. There we go. Oops. Turn my camera off so we have bandwidth and no problems. Okay, so obviously, as Megan has stated, myself and Jasmine are your presenters today. A little bit about ourselves. We are a medical device consulting firm based in The Hague. We have U.S. offices in Austin, and we have a very experienced team of consultants and executive management who've been working in medical devices for 20 plus years. Myself is over 30 years working in medical devices. So we are starting this journey, or we've already started this journey, from the quality system regulations that FDA has in place to the new quality management system regulations. The FDA published their new rules, which I'll talk about in a moment, in February of 2024 with a 2-year transition period. And I notice that there's a little bit of a mistake on there, but I have the question to ask all of you. Are you the tortoise or the hare? We've all heard the story of the tortoise and the hare having a race, and the tortoise took off on his slow pace and went forward, and the hare decided they would sleep and wait until the end because they knew they were so fast. So I ask you, are you the tortoise or are you the hare? Have you been waiting until the end, right before February 2026, to transition to the quality management system regulations? Or have you been taking a nice slow and steady approach to doing this? So we should be having our first poll here now. Kate? So the poll question is, what medical device classes do you sell in the United States? And we're just going to take a minute here to see. It's a large majority of the people are selling class 1 and class 2 devices. So that's excellent to see. This gives us a bit of an idea. We'll wait another minute here to see where we get to. Okay, we can turn the poll off now. Thank you very much, everybody, for voting. As I said, it looks like the majority of people are selling class 1 and class 2 devices, as it is right now. So a little bit on the history of the regulations, because I think giving you a bit of a background will help here. Before 1978, and before 1976 specifically, the FDA regulated medical devices under their pharmaceutical rules. So there were no specific rules for medical devices written in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. In 1976, they introduced the medical device amendments that started the process of introducing laws as it applies to medical devices. And these were officially put into regulation in 1978 under the 21 CFR Part 820 were the first time we had quality system regulations, or at the time they were called good manufacturing practices. In 1996, we had the most critical update that was done to the quality system regulations. So we went from calling it the good manufacturing practices to now quality system regulations. And introduced in October of that year, 1996, was the first time the FDA incorporated design control as a requirement in their regulation, and such that the idea was for the FDA was that they wanted to have a set of regulations for design control that put them in alignment with other countries around the world. At this time in 1996, we had ISO 9001. We had our first release of ISO 1345. So manufacturers were starting to see this requirement for design controls, and the FDA put that in place as a requirement. Another critical reason for doing that was to ensure that medical devices that were going to be released were going to be safe and effective. What I can tell you, though, is as a manufacturer, in 1996, I was working with a company that was designing a Class 3 device for the United States, and we had done all of our design work before 1996, but our PMA was submitted, and we then found the rules get incorporated, and before our PMA was approved, we had to transition everything into the new quality system regulations and take all of our lovely design work that was in lab notebooks, put it into actual design documentations to ensure compliance with Part 820.30 design control. So it was a significant impact for my company I worked with in 1996. Okay, so we're going to introduce now the quality management system regulation. So as I said on an earlier slide, the FDA has been looking at for a number of years making a transition from their existing quality system regulations to a more less unique system and more compliant with what's aligned around the world. So what they did was they introduced the quality management system regulations in February 2024, which closely aligns the FDA now with ISO 1345, which, as I said, is used by a lot of other jurisdictions around the world. What they did, and I'll talk about it in a moment, was basically take the entire text from ISO 1345 and incorporated it into the quality management system regulation. For those of us who've been working in medical devices for quite a while and have worked with CFR Part 820, we know that this section is quite large in terms of the number of regulations that are in there, or the number of information in there, where we've in the past had 20 subparts and many different sections. We now are stuck with, or now left with 2 subparts and really 6 main subsections for the regulation. Now, the scope of the quality management system regulations is set up so that any manufacturer that's engaged, and I'll read here, I'm sorry, but design, manufacture, packaging, labeling, storage, installation, or service of a finished medical device must establish and maintain a quality management system that is appropriate for the specified device. So the scope now of the quality management system regulation clearly calls out that all manufacturers of a finished medical device must maintain a quality management system that's appropriate for its specific medical device. It does go on to say, though, if you do not have all those different sections, if you don't have sterilization, if you don't do installation or labeling, installation or servicing, you don't have to comply with that specific section of the regulation, but you do need to have a quality management system in place. Does this apply to all devices? Well, specifically, the FDA has called out that this only applies officially to finished medical devices for human use and for manufacturers of human cells, tissues, and cellular and tissue-based products. This does not apply to manufacturers of components or parts, though the FDA has specifically written in their regulation that they encourage manufacturers to consider including the provisions of this regulation as appropriate for their manufacturing process. as well as it does not apply to manufacturers of blood and blood components used for transfusion or further manufacturing. Now the FDA, what they did was when they incorporated the ISO 1345 into their regulations, what they did was they took the definitions from ISO 1345 clause 3, as well as the definitions from ISO 9000 2015, which is a specific standard that deals with terms and definitions and vocabulary associated with quality management systems. And they took those clauses and put them now as the definitions within the quality management system regulation, as well as incorporating 5 unique definitions that are unique for the FDA. Of course, one of them being the Federal Food and Drug and Cosmetics Act, and finished device, which is not defined within ISO 1345 or ISO 9000. So I mentioned this thing about incorporating the quality management system into the quality management system regulations, this ISO 1345 requirements. The FDA, as well as other US regulators, have this ability to incorporate the language from another standard or from another regulation directly into their own regulations by using the term incorporation by reference. So incorporation by reference allows them to include all the text from ISO 1345 into the quality management system regulations without having to include the specific text. This is really important that they do this because they don't control. So the FDA doesn't control the language of ISO 1345 standard. The ISO organization controls when ISO 1345 gets updated. So by incorporating by reference, if there's an update to ISO 1345 in the future, that update is automatically included in the quality management system regulations. Now, for the quality management system regulations, the entire sections of ISO 1345 has been included, as well as Section 3 of the ISO 9000 2015. So Part 820.10, Requirements for Quality Management System, clearly calls out that manufacturers must document a quality management system that complies with ISO 1345 and the other elements of Part 820. So those 6 sections I showed in an earlier slide. It also requires you to comply with the requirements pulled out in Parts 803, which is medical device reporting or serious adverse reporting or serious adverse events. Part 806, which is corrections and removals, which is similar to device recalls. Part 821, which is medical device tracking, and Part 830, which is for unique device identification. And then it specifically calls out that you have to comply with the traceability requirements from ISO 1345, as well as the design and development requirements. Now, I want to pull out a really important word here. It says in that first bullet point, complies with ISO 1345. The FDA does not say at any point that you must be certified to ISO 1345. And that is a very critical statement here. So the FDA is saying you have to comply with the requirements of it, but you don't have to go through the entire process of getting certification. Not that that isn't a good idea. That's a really good idea to go through certification. But if you don't need to do that for other markets, the FDA is saying that you just need to comply with it to address the FDA's responsibility. Now, within 820.35 control of records, the FDA has called out specific records that you must maintain, and specifically medical device, for medical devices, complaints, service activities as they applicable to you, the UDI requirements, and confidentiality requirements. Why they put this specific sections in here is that there are unique differences between ISO 13485 and the FDA, what they want within the FDA regulations. So for complaints, not only do they want you to follow the requirements of ISO 1345 Part 8.2.2, but also specifically what they state in 820.35. Now, the confidentiality requirements is an important clause for you. What that says is that if you have records that you do not want to have disclosed outside of the FDA, you can put on those records that these records are confidential. This is important because as a U.S. government agency, the FDA is responsible to follow the Freedom of Information Act requirements, which means that an outside party can request from the FDA copies of records that they've reviewed as part of their process of inspection or device reviews, or such as a 510K or PMA. Therefore, it's really critical that if you have records that you do not want to have disclosed, that you indicate on that record that they are confidential. And this clause allows you to do that. Now, FDA has called out specifically in 820.45 their requirements for device labeling and packaging controls. And specifically that, in addition to what's in ISO 1345 clause 7.5.1, which is for manufacturing, that it also states that manufacturers must have a documented procedure for outlining the processes for ensuring the integrity, inspection, storage, and operations for labeling, and that you have to examine your labels before you release them to either storage or for production. This is important to note that this is different from what's in ISO 13485. Within ISO 13485, there is no specific requirements for doing this labeling review, not specifically called out, that is. And this is not unique to what was existing already in the quality system regulations. But for those manufacturers who hadn't necessarily seen that requirement in the old QSRs, it's important to note that this is something that the FDA has specifically called out as a key requirement. Now, I think there might be people on this call going, but wait, I have a class 1 medical device, and isn't my device exempt from this? Well, under the old regulations, under the old quality system regulations, the FDA had identified about approximately 155 devices that may be exempt from the current good manufacturing practices or the quality system regulations. This exemption was written specifically into the regulation associated with that device. And I've got an example on the screen here for an optical vision aid. And what it says there in the specific regulation, so 886.5915, is that this specific type of device, when it is battery powered, is exempt from the requirements of the quality system regulations, with the exception of the control of records and complaints handling. Now, it specifically says that you are exempt from doing that. Now, what happens with us now when we transition to the quality management system regulations? It doesn't specifically say in the new quality management system regulations that there are these 155 devices that are exempt from the QMSR. But what it says is that in the regulation, it says that if there are regulations that conflict with what's in the quality management system regulations, those other regulations will supersede the more generally applicable requirements. Now, this may be obvious to some of you. It wasn't necessarily obvious to me, and I wanted to get clarification of this. So I contacted the device advice group, or the device assistance group at FDA. They're also known as DICE, D-I-C-E. And the first person I communicated with was confused by the question because he didn't know the answer, so he passed it on to somebody else. And what they specifically said when I communicated with somebody from the group responsible for implementing the quality management system regulations is that, yes, if your device is exempt under the current quality system regulations, so you're one of those 155 types of devices that are exempt under the quality system regulations, that exemption will also hold under the quality management system regulation. So you will not have to follow all of the sections of ISO 1345 if you are one of those 155 device types. But you still must comply with the record requirements under 820.35, control of records, and the applicable sections of ISO 1345. So, for example, complaints handling, which is called out in 820.35, you'll have to comply with that, as well as the requirements of ISO 13485, clause 8.2.2. So Yes, you're exempt from all of the critical pieces, design control, traceability, etc. But from a records perspective, you still have that responsibility to comply with that. Okay, so what are some differences we must consider now as we move from the quality system regulations to the quality management system regulations? Now, I'm not expecting everyone to be able to see this slide, and in fact, with my old eyes, I can barely read what's on the screen here. But what we have here is a table that shows on the left-hand column all of the applicable sections, or subparts, I should say, of the quality system regulations from the FDA as it is today in 2025. These will be obsoleted in February of 2026 when the new quality management system regulations come into place. And what we have here is that I tried to show that almost everything that you have to do under under the old quality system regulations is also currently in ISO 1345. There are some differences that are specific, again, to manufacturers going with the FDA. Those are, again, those specific requirements around device labeling and packaging, requirements around records that are different because of the FDA regulations as compared to ISO 1345. Now, one thing I really want to point out is an important change. So currently under the quality system regulations, under the general requirements for records, which is that CFR Part 82180, it states that under FDA inspections and in general the FDA, they're allowed to inspect your records, your documents as part of their FDA inspection process. However, it also clearly states that they do not have the rights to review management review reports, quality audits, and supplier audit reports, as this has been specifically called out as an exception to the rule. Now, what about our transition to the quality management system regulation? Well, this restriction has been removed. Basically what it is that there is no longer the exception written directly in the quality management system regulations, and therefore we default to what is in ISO 1345. And what is in ISO 1345 is that during the audit, or in this case inspection from the FDA, all records are eligible to be reviewed. So therefore, your FDA inspectors will have the authority to review your management review reports, so not just a certification that you've completed management review, but the entire management review report, all of your internal audit records, and all of your supplier audit records. Now, what's I think is very important to note that even if the FDA hasn't in the past been able to review specifically your management review records or your records of your audits, they have been able to look at your CAPAs. They have been able to look at your non-conforming reports. Therefore, they've been able to get a lot of the information that would have already been in your management review and in your audits as part of their inspection. So it's not like they haven't seen a lot of the information already, but now they have the rights to review the actual documents that this information has been published in. Okay, design control. So one of the things that ISO 1345 says is that all manufacturers have to do design and development under clause 7.3. There is no exceptions in ISO 13485 for design and development. The FDA, though, has stated in their regulation, as it was in the past, that all class 1 devices are excluded from doing design and development, with the exception of 5 device types, and those 5 device types, such as non-powdered surgeon's glove, those 5 device types were previously published in the old QSRs and were specifically called out in the quality management system regulations. And then in addition, if you have a device that has automated software in it, your device is not excluded from that, and you must comply with the requirements for design and development. Okay, design planning. One of the things that's really different with ISO 13485 as compared to the quality system regulations for design is that the section on design planning or design and development plans have much more specific requirements included in them. Specifically, that you have to have a documented plan, you have to document changes. All of that detailed information is called out as specific required elements in the design and development plan under ISO 13485. Now, this is important for manufacturers that are doing design right now, because if we look at manufacturers designing products, we kind of can think of them as three different types of devices. We can think of legacy devices as that products that have already gone through design and development before February 2026. And for those devices, as long as that design and development and the transfers happened before February 2026, it's not an issue for us to actually say to you, sorry, it's not an issue for you. You do not have to comply with the new quality management system regulations. If you are a new device, meaning you are going to start your design and your transition after February 2026, you have to follow the new rules. But if you're this transitional device, so a device that's right now in design and development and you don't expect your design transfer to happen before the effective date, which is February 2026, you're going to need to ensure your design and development documentations and your plan comply with the new requirements under the quality management system regulations. Now, one of the things that I did not incorporate in the slide here that I think is important as well, when it comes to design inputs, under the quality management system regulations, unlike in the old quality system regulations, there is now a requirement for you to incorporate your output from your risk management into design inputs. So risk management is clearly called out now as part of design and development in the early stages of design and development to ensure that any issues that are come out of the risk management, meaning you have to include specific design inputs or product specifications to ensure those risks are alleviated, that must be included now in your design input process. Under the design review, one of the things that was specific for the old quality system regulations was that manufacturers were required to include what we call an independent reviewer in a design review. So in that design review, somebody who was not responsible for that design stage had to be included in that design review itself. That requirement doesn't exist within the quality management system regulations or ISO 13485. However, it's a really good clause, a really good thing to have is somebody independent from that design stage actually being included in the design reviews. As it relates to design verification, one of the explicit requirements of the ISO 13485 and thus the quality management system regulations is that verification plans must be written. They must be actually documented, and these plans must include the methods, acceptance criteria, and its appropriate statistical techniques for determining sample size. Additionally, as part of design verification, your reports need to not only include just the results, I should say. Your report has to also include the conclusions of that design. So what actually comes out of it? What does that actually mean? And if you have a device that is connected to other medical devices or interacts with other medical devices, now with your verification testing, you must ensure that your testing addresses that connection or interface. So you can't just do testing on your specific device if your device connects with another device. Your testing has to incorporate what is the impact of the use of my device on that other device, and vice versa. Under design validation, again, there's an explicit requirement in the quality management system regulations that you have a validation plan. And in addition to your validation plan, that you document what the methods are, your acceptance criteria, and how you determined your sample size. One thing that's important, though, for those of you who are also selling into Europe or thinking of selling into Europe, the new quality management system regulations, when it incorporates the ISO 13485 standard, uses the term clinical evaluation and performance evaluation as part of the actual standard. Now, the FDA doesn't use the term clinical evaluation or performance evaluation. They use the word clinical investigation, which is included as part of 21 CFR Part 812. For Europe, a clinical evaluation and a performance evaluation has a very unique definition or a unique responsibility for you. And these regulatory requirements are not applicable specifically to the FDA. For your design changes, when we transition to the quality management system regulations and follow ISO 13485, one of the things that's really important is that as part of your design change, you have to look at the impact of the change, not only on the device itself, but the constituent parts, and whether those parts and the product itself are in production or the product has been already released and delivered. Therefore, if you make a change to your device that has a significant impact on the product, you have to determine whether there's an impact on those products that have already been released. Additionally, as part of your design change, you have to incorporate how those design changes impact your risk management file. For design transfer, previously we looked at design transfer to ensure that we could actually create production specifications. That doesn't change. So we still have to be able to create a product from it. Now, not only do we have to consider, do we have the specifications to build it, but can we actually build it? Do we have the capacity or capability within our facility to actually build this widget? It's an important piece of the design transfer requirement. FDA inspections. The process for FDA inspection has to change. The current process follows the quality system inspection technique, or QSIT, which is directly aligned with the current quality system regulations. The FDA has acknowledged that they have to make a change to their process. However, at this time, no changes have been implemented. And therefore, as we switch to the next slide, I think it's absolutely imperative for manufacturers to keep an eye on when the FDA makes these changes to the QSIT to ensure that they're prepared for a future inspection. Now, it's important to note the FDA has also said if your facility is inspected by them before February 2026, their inspectors will use the QSIT approach and expect that your existing quality management system complies with the quality system regulations as they are today, not the quality management system regulations as they apply in February of 2026. But you might also ask the question, I have ISO 13485. Do I need to still get inspected by the FDA? Am I exempt now from FDA inspections? No. FDA inspections include the review of FDA-specific regulatory requirements. We talked about Part 803 before for medical device reporting, 806 corrections and removal, etc. So your certification to ISO 13485 does not include those elements as part of the audit the ISO 13485 auditor is doing. Now, if you have a medical device single audit program audit and you have MDSAP, the FDA sections are included in the scope, if that's included in your scope of your audit, and therefore you can expect that the MDSAP audit, will be a sufficient alternative to a routine FDA inspection. So routine FDA inspections will not necessarily occur if you have MDSAP. However, the FDA always reserves the right to do an inspection of a facility if there are issues associated with the product or there are issues associated with the manufacturer. Another important note is if you do get FDA inspection and you are complying with ISO 13485 as part of the new quality management system regulations, the FDA will not issue a certificate of conformity to ISO 13485. Their inspection will stand as it is just an inspection of your facility, and there will be no standard, there will be no certificate, etc. that comes out of that. So I think we have another poll here. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for voting. We'll let it go for another few seconds. It is clear that everybody has an ISO 13485 quality management system in place, and some don't currently comply with the existing FDA QSRs, but the vast majority, 95% of the people, have at least ISO 13485 in place. So we can end the poll there. Thank you very much. So let's talk about this transition. So how do we prepare for the transition? So for you, if you're a quality assurance person or a regulatory affairs person, absolutely imperative that you review the published quality management system regulation. Read the preamble. I know it's a long document, but the 83 comments that the FDA have published, as well as their responses, are really good knowledge, a good source of knowledge on what the FDA's thinking was as it pertains to implementing the quality management system regulations. And it helps address a lot of those questions of why is the FDA doing this? Why is the FDA not incorporating what the old rules were? Read, if you haven't done this already, if this is new to you, and it doesn't seem to be the case with everybody on the call, but if you haven't read it, read ISO 13485. Also, if you can get a copy of ISO 13485 2016, a practical guide, it's a nice read that gives a little bit more information about how you incorporate a quality system into your company. I also suggest that you look at the FDA's presentations on the transition to the quality management system regulation. This is available from the FDA's website under their CDRH Learn portal. And then also look at other presentations from other groups, such as this webinar and other ones, to see what other people are saying, because this is a big transition that everyone has to consider. When it comes to training your staff, I think it really depends upon the sophistication of the company. If you are a very small company, the training on the transition isn't going to be as critical as if you are a larger company with a lot of involvement of the quality system in place. But as a minimum, your quality system training should include, a review of the differences between the current quality system regulation and the updated quality management system regulations. Again, I really would consider including elements of that FDA's presentation through CDRH Learn, or borrowing from that presentation, because there's really good information there that will help your staff. Big thing to do. If you haven't done this already, do a gap assessment. Review what is already in place in your quality system against the ISO 13485 and the updated quality management system regulation. Specifically put an emphasis on Part 82035, the control of records, and 82045, device labeling and packaging controls. These are specific things that you need to be considering as changes to your quality system. And if after you've done your gap analysis or your gap assessment, create a quality plan to address those gaps. This means you're going to be updating procedures and creating new procedures. But also, it's really important that while the FDA is saying that you have to do all of this, they're also saying that the current quality system regulations are in place until February of 2026, which means your quality system has to comply with the quality system regulations as they are today, and then as of February, the new quality management system regulations. So there is a bit of a possibility of having a dual system in place or changes at the last moment. Highly recommend that after you've done your gap assessment and you close those gaps, that you do an internal audit of your quality system to ensure that you've addressed all of those changes. I would consider using an outside auditor to ensure objectivity and impartiality. But again, that's up to you as a company. And if you've already got these items in place, I would really be looking at, from your internal audit, looking at the implementation of those specific changes with respect to records and device labeling and packaging. Now, how much effort is actually needed? It's interesting when you if you read the preamble, as I did preparing for this, the FDA specifically calls out that there's around 25,000 registered establishments that are impacted by the transition from the quality system regulation to the quality management system regulation. So there's about 25,000 companies who have to look at this, of which the FDA said about 5,300 of these companies probably don't comply with ISO 1345 based on their assumption that very small companies, those less than 10 people, probably don't have a quality system that's beyond just the FDA. So the FDA did an estimate that says for these companies that need to transition from the existing QSRs to the new quality management system regulations that comply with ISO 13485, that they're suggesting it's going to be about 64 hours or 8 days of work. But I think it's important to take a look at that myself. And I also looked at it from the perspective of what happens if you're an established company? What amount of time will it actually take? And I just did a quick estimate based on some experience doing quality system implementations and transitions from ISO 2003, ISO 1345 2003 to 2016, way back when. So I think from a very small company perspective, I won't get into the full details, but I think the 64 hours the FDA has suggested is low. I truly believe you're looking at least 20 more hours than that. I would say that if you're trying to budget, if you haven't started this, if you're that hare instead of the tortoise from the beginning, that you prepare yourself for this to be at least about 100 hours of work, because it is a lot of work to do that gap assessment, updating procedures or writing new procedures. And if you're going to be doing that internal audit to ensure that your internal audit complies or addresses the compliance to all of the sections that you have to deal with. But even if you're an established company, I still think there's work for you to do. It may not be 80 hours or 100 hours of work, but it's probably about 20 hours of work. Make sure your procedures are in place. Update your procedures that are necessary. Check this over with an internal audit. So there is work that needs to be done. I think we have another poll question here. Am I right? Thank you, Kate. So are you ready for this transition to the quality management system regulations? So please let us know what your thoughts are. Well, not a clear majority, but what I'm seeing right now is that, a good 40+% of the people who've actually voted on this, that's not obviously not all the people in attendance, but 40+% of the people who are voting on this are stating that that's why we're attending this webinar. So I'm hoping that what I've given you today is helping you towards that transition process. So we can close the poll then and go back to the last couple slides. So this journey from the quality system regulations to the quality management system regulations, I ask you again, are you the hare? Are you the tortoise? Are you waiting until the end to do this transition, or have you already started the process? I think it's important for us to think about that, because as you can see, there are a lot of steps that are necessary, and I address design control as my real big emphasis today, but there are other sections that you need to be considering, and therefore it's absolutely important for you to be considering how long it's going to take. Don't wait until the end of this year to start the transition. Start today if you haven't already. Okay, I am going to now switch to the Q&A section, and I'll turn it back to Megan and Kate.
Yeah, thanks, Daryl. That was awesome. So yeah, we had some questions submitted in advance. So I'm going to start with those, and there was some also in the chat that hopefully we can get to some of those. So the first question we have is, will the FDA provide any formal guidance on how manufacturers should interpret the integration of ISO 13485 into U.S. regulations?
Okay.
Megan, I think I can address that. I know I'm a little bit of a new voice on the call this morning, but the FDA, as always, will be providing additional guidance. As we know, they are looking at ways to support manufacturers as they are making this transition. And if you follow the FDA site, where Daryl has already mentioned, where the CDHR has provided a lot of learning material and video to help with that transition, and additional guidance documents should be posted in the interim, along with other documents that address those areas on the FDA site. And I know that our company will stay apprised of all of that news and guidance, and we will also make sure to allow others to be aware of that when it's released.
Thank you, Jasmine. Next question, what are some effective training strategies to educate staff personnel about the transition from QSR to QMSR?
I'll take that one. Thank you, Megan. I mean, I think as I kind of mentioned before, I think one of the critical pieces is, to start the transition early. So that means start looking at the training that's necessary to do this, and look to the differences between the old regulation and the new regulation. So the table I showed you, which was very difficult to read, which kind of laid a link out to the, what was under the quality system regulation and what comes out as part of ISO 1345. I think it's imperative that you look at something like that to see where there are similarities and differences. And I think the other part of it is to really emphasize how now under ISO 13485, and something I didn't include in the slides because many other people have talked about it already, is around the idea of risk management. So in the existing quality system regulations, it talks about risk one time, basically one reference to risk, specifically to the word risk in the quality system regulations, versus around 40 plus times in the new ISO 134, the new QMSR, which relies upon ISO 13485. So there's a substantial leaning towards risk as an important part of your quality management system. So when you're putting your training strategies together and you're comparing what's existing under the old rules to the new rules, look at those differences and definitely take into consideration risk, because a lot of the decisions that are made in quality are around the risks. And some of our staff may not necessarily know that as how critical it is, what the risks associated with doing complaints handling, the risks associated with changes to our device, the risks associated with dealing with updating processes. So that's kind of what I would do. I know that may not be the best answer for everybody, but that's one place I would start.
Great. Yeah, the next question is kind of related to that. How does the increased emphasis on risk management affect post-market surveillance?
Yeah, that's a critical piece. So, under the FDA QSRs, there's not a lot of discussion about what they call post-market surveillance. That's pulled out more in ISO 13485. And what that really talks about is gathering of information associated with the use of your device. And not only just whether there's been adverse events or medical device reporting, as they say in the FDA terms, or device recalls, but have there been complaints and changes that have been made to your device? And that risk is so important when it comes to looking at post-market surveillance to determine whether has this information that we've collected from our complaints, from our changes and such, has that information that we've collected had a significant impact on the risk of our device. So our post-market surveillance allows us now to be looking back at our device and saying, oh, we've actually haven't ever identified this previous risks associated with it. Or it can be the vice versa. Doing post-market surveillance, the emphasis on risk management may allow us to say, hey, we actually have less risk associated with our device than we thought about in the past.
Great, thank you. So a hot topic, will there be any additional FDA expectations regarding software validation, especially for AI-driven medical devices?
I think I can speak to that, Daryl. So overall, we've seen quite a bit of guidance from the FDA over the last few years related to AI, specifically related to the performance risk management. So as Daryl was speaking, the emphasis really is on that risk management piece, and having an established QMSR in place that'll help you with that life cycle management. AI, just overall as its technology, it changes, and it relies on live data. And so that life cycle management is going to be key, in having that robust system to deal with the risk that's presented, from that life cycle management is going to be very important. The FDA does have guidance that is available, and I know that if you check out our website, we do have some blogs and material that we have posted related to that specifically.
Great. Next question. Does FDA foresee future updates to QMSR, especially as ISO 13485 continues to evolve?
So I can
Well,
definitely.
that's a great.
I
Yeah,
was going to
Jasmine,
say
you take
defer to
that one.
Daryl.
Great,
No, I was
please.
actually going to let you go ahead and speak to that, Daryl, because I feel like that's more your your wheelhouse.
Okay. Okay, no problem. Thanks, Jasmine. I think absolutely that's going to have to happen. But one of the things that the FDA has kind of covered themselves with is by using this incorporation by reference, as I referenced in the presentation. It allows them, if ISO 1345 evolves and they agree with the changes to ISO 1345, they don't necessarily have to make updates to the quality management system regulation. So if the updates, and we know that coming soon, well, it's been spoken about that there's going to be updates to ISO 13485 coming. When that happens, we don't really know, and it's been 9 years since the last update. We know that the technical committee is looking at it right now, and given that there was updates to ISO 9001 fairly recently, we expect there to be updates. If those updates don't change how the FDA interprets quality management, I don't see them needing to make much of an update to the quality management system regulations. Historically, as I showed from an earlier slide, the FDA doesn't make significant changes to the quality system regulations and probably won't for the quality management system regulations. But it's important to note that this is a new world for the FDA. I mean, I was at an event many years ago with a former FDA person who was responsible for the quality system group. I won't name her name, but she said to me, hey, I asked her if we'll ever transition to ISO 1345. She says, probably not in my career. She's no longer at FDA, so it wasn't in her career with FDA that they made this transition. So will they do future updates? I think it's possible. I think it's absolutely possible, but I think it is only going to happen if they see something that comes out of the first few years of this, or something drastic happens with an update to ISO 1345, which I don't expect to have happen.
Great. Just being aware of the time, we'll try to get to one or two more questions before we close out. What are the possible consequences or impacts of not transitioning to the QMSR by the established deadline?
I mean, I think the challenging piece is if you don't transition by the established deadline, and you ever get an FDA inspection, you are no longer in compliance with the quality management system regulations, and the FDA will take action, whether that's issuing a 483, which is not only it's a notice of nonconformity that comes from an FDA inspection, or they could in fact issue a warning letter if that's the case. This also could come up if you are submitting submitting some kind of submission to the FDA, whether that's a FDA 510K submission or a pre-market approval application, and they looked into your documentation and saw that the information that you included was not in alignment with the new quality management system regulations. And I could see that if you have a device that is going through, for example, the 510K, and you're submitting design information, and the documentation you provide with that 510K doesn't align with clause 7.3 of ISO 1345, the design and development, it is possible they could pull that up and ask a question about it, which could have an impact on your submission, which could have an impact further down the line. But because there's no certification requirement from the FDA, the most dramatic consequences that would happen if there was won't be there. So it really is, the FDA would come back to you if you did not do the transition. I do not recommend you wait. I do not recommend at all that you wait. I think the transition, we've been given 2 years to do this transition. And if you have submissions coming up in the future, I think it's absolutely imperative you do this. If you are MDSAP certified, if you have an MDSAP system that includes the FDA in it, I guarantee you that the FDA section of your inspection, or your audit, I should say, by your auditing organization or your notified body after February 2026, I guarantee you they will be looking to see how you dealt with the transition from the QSRs to the QMSRs. Don't wait. Don't take any chances. Really do look at the transition and get it completed by February 2026.
Awesome. Thank you, Daryl. On that note, we'll wrap up here. So again, we will send out a recording of the webinar for anyone who registered, attended, along with a transcript. So you'll get responses to all of these questions. There were a few that we did not get to and some additional ones that came in the chat. So we'll make sure that that's included in that follow-up email with responses. If anything else comes up, there'll also be a link to schedule a one-on-one call with someone on our team. So if you do have anything that's more specific, we're happy to help. So thank you, Daryl. I think you have one more slide and we'll then wrap up.
Yeah, I got 2 slides left really quickly. I just wanted to say thanks to my colleagues for their involvement in putting this presentation together. This is from the regulatory team. Special thank you to the marketing department. So Megan, who you've been hearing, Kate, who's been working in the background, Tiffany, who's been working in the background. Thank you very much for all of your hard work. Ada, for putting together the beautiful slides. I could never make it look so nice. So I just want to say thank you to everybody. And then I'll end with this last slide. Don't forget, if you have questions, to reach out and contact us. There's our email address. There is our URL, our website location. Please do reach out to us. You can ask us questions about the presentation. You can ask us about the services that we offer. We're here to help you. I've been doing this for a long time, and I mean, the team collectively, we pride ourselves in making sure that we help companies like yours. So if you do need some help, please do reach out to us.
Great. Thank you.